Welcome back to Manibil. This is a small response video to a question or a comment on the first part of my philosophy series, the part dealing with ontology. And Valil Kerte wrote 4 days ago. He says, I agree with your helicopter view approach and not getting into too much detail initially. It reminds me of pyramid writing, whereby one is presented with a title, a brief summary, and then the full description, thereby allowing one to decide which level of detail one needs or can handle at that moment. Yes, I am not particularly familiar with the idea of pyramid writing. I might know it as some other term. There is, I know that the famous author Ernest Hemingway is famous for the idea of the iceberg, and that you get some inputs to a story, but there's some unspoken underlying story underneath that is maybe hinted at by the usage of the terms and what is left out of the story and so on, right? It's implied by the description, sort of between the lines, or so, however you want to put it. And if that's what you mean, it's not exactly what I'm trying to do. But it's the difference between, it's the approach of philosophy is that it's a meta level of thinking. So it's a more structured way of thinking. And the helicopter view is staying on top of the structure. You can dig down into the details in order to, the part of this structure has this content, and then therefore the next structure, part of the structure comes, and then you describe maybe to some extent the contents of that part of the structure. But in order to get the view of what comes, the order of things, what follows from what, you need to raise yourself above the contents of your thinking and see the structure of the thinking. So that's, in my opinion, something that seems to be either ignored or people not even have an idea that it might be necessary to have structure to the thinking. And also maybe because in academic philosophy, a lot of it is atomized into, there's somebody dealing with a particular philosophy of consciousness over there. So they don't need the bigger picture because they have dug themselves into this particular little aspect, and then they spend their whole life on that, basically, right? But I see philosophy as an attempt at creating a manual for your life. And it's not good enough. I mean, it's like if you build a car, it's not enough to spend time on building wheels. You can't spend the rest of your life doing the wheels if what you're actually going for or attempting to use is a whole car. Maybe the analogy or the metaphor doesn't work, but I hope it's sort of the completist mentality of the thinking. Philosophy can be sort of entertaining, and you're sitting on a bar or a cafe discussing some, either a philosopher or a particular kind of philosophy, and you're sort of going left and right, and it makes you sort of feel good to get some gymnastics of that part of the brain that deals with these kinds of questions and endeavors. But at some point it needs to be sort of, okay, I need my manual for life now, right? I can't live a life while I'm still creating the manual for my life. So I'm sort of kind of result oriented, and the usual thing is, as I pointed out earlier, people get interested in some aspects. It's not like, I don't think they even have an idea. I have to go all the way from, as I say, a reduction base to a moral principle. It's sort of, it's kind of subjective. Maybe you could say it's a picky choosy kind of. It's the quick fix kind of approach, maybe, right? That, okay, I have some questions in my life. What kind of philosophies exist on this particular kind of topic? Okay, which one of them do I like? I like this one because whatever, right? And then people are satisfied with that philosophy. That's not good enough for me. So the helicopter view is also another way of saying you have to get the overview yourself, right? And what you have to get an overview of is your thinking, right? So therefore, it's a kind of meta thinking. And the helicopter view is where you create that meta thinking, or you sort of establishes the framework or the content of what you need to do. And then you go and do it, sort of, right? So, yes, I was just checking if there was another part down here, which also relates to the question, the first part of his question or comment here, right? But I want to illustrate maybe in another way the difference between thinking and meta thinking, you could say, right? It's just an example. It leans up against what Vallée-Laquerte says here, that you can if you write a book about, for instance, some kind of history or some kind of part of history or something like that, you can go in a very particular little, this detail, and then this particular event or what that day something happened, and I'm going to spend 500 pages in a book discussing what is going on that day. But you could also talk about the whole history of the 19th century, for instance, right? And I'm going to show you an example. I have a book here about Schubert, with the famous German composer, who was sort of more or less contemporary with Beethoven, right? At least the later 80s of Beethoven. And he didn't get very old, by the way, right? And it's hugely, very detailed with pictures of writing and pictures of drawings of Schubert, and also the analysis of his music, and also it's really good book, right? And there's even a compact disc here, right? Or yeah, so it's something like 500 pages about Schubert. This is one person in the 19th century, right? But you could also write a book like this, which is called The Transformation of the World, A Global History of the 19th Century by Jürgen Osterhammel, right? So this is a book about the whole of the 19th century. So the difference is, this is more like everyday thinking, you could say, right? It's a particular aspect, sort of, okay, I deal with this and observe it and listen, and this is more meta level understanding, right? This is the big picture thing. This is more like philosophy. This is a book that a philosopher would be interested in, right? Or I'm not saying I'm not interested in this book here, right? That's not what I'm saying. But if you want to understand things, this is going broader and more helicopter level, right? So this is sort of the meta level of history. This is just history, right? Okay. Vallée-Laquerte says, this is an information architecture that is seen in various types of information repositories. Yeah, but you could say it's like a library, right? The library says library, and then there's all the categories. There are 100 categories of this, that, and the other, and so on, right? And then you can go in and find your book. I understand that kind of structure. This is very natural, in my opinion, right? But it's, yeah, I guess there's something to what you say, but it's not completely correct. Maybe I should say, right? Okay. Then there is this, one can still impose a necessary order of disclosure such that the reader is aware of the pre and co-requisites of the current topic, but the reader can still choose when and where to drill down. Yeah, I understand where you're going. You're comparing doing this kind of philosophy I've done and sort of more general approach to various levels of detail. And there's similarities, but it's not quite the same. But, it's sort of on the right. It rhymes, right? But the drilling down is kind of interesting in that when I try to create my philosophy, doesn't mean that there could be some underlying more detailed kinds of philosophies. But when I present my philosophy make this presentation, I am sort of taking the what you could call a more helicopter view of presentation in order to not give you too much details, right? Because then the big picture would drown in details. This is usually what happens when people discuss philosophy. It becomes both very abstract and very detail oriented, sort of perfectionist kind of thing, and it just drowns my overview of what is going on. So if I'm bogged down in understanding the terms, and there might be some contradiction in the use of terms, and I also have to keep an overview, okay, how far did we get compared to what might have come before this topic and what comes after this topic, and how are they connected, and so on. So it's just kind of futile usually, right? So I want to keep it simple, and this is why it's necessary to find these hard stops under the way to say, okay, when I get to this point, I need to get to this, and then I need to get to this. So, and it's more intuitive or more easy to get a grasp of. It might not be perfect. It might be too little details at times when I do it, but I'd rather make sure that people understand what I'm saying rather than they necessarily think that it's perfect, right? It's better to get the picture than it's perfect than perfection that drowns the picture in details. So it's this balancing act. Have you used the mind map software such as FreeMind? It can be a great visual tool for rapidly testing, collecting, grouping, presenting related text, links, and media. No, I have never used that one. So, and I'm not sure why I would want it. But anyway, so just to recapture the last overview of my ontology. So this is sort of a stylized conceptual presentation, right? And this is sort of encompassing the thinking without making it too complicated. You could go into you could spend a year deciphering or detailing out, plotting out the category C abstractions, all the kinds of abstractions there might be, and whether or not they should all be called abstractions necessarily, and so on and so on and so on, right? You could spend the rest of your life possibly, but because I don't need to map it out in order to get to the next step in my philosophy, I don't spend too much time on it, other than saying it's there, and if you want to dig in and create a detailed description, be my guest. But it doesn't take away from my philosophy if you were to go down, and you also sort of allude to that, and I would agree with that. And I think that's also an invitation to sort of kind of invite people in to say you can sort of add your own part of the picture here if you want to. I'm just pointing out what is necessary to get from A to C, right? Okay, that's all I have for this one. And please share, like, and subscribe. Consider donation and links below. Let me have your comment. What do you think? Otherwise, see you in the next one.